For comparison, I'd like to show you how the GNOME desktop environment looks. This is the default desktop in Fedora. However, for a number of reasons, I believe that it will not turn out to be practical for novice users who have so far only used Windows. Once you've become more experienced system users, I encourage you to try this environment too, because each environment has its advantages. Some things I say during this presentation are my personal opinions. After all, it's difficult to be objective once you get used to certain ways of doing things. I'd like to show you GNOME in order to illustrate how completely different graphical user interfaces can be within one operating system. That's what Linux is all about. Everyone will find something that suits them. There's no one and only way of how certain actions should be carried out. GNOME has already been installed on our virtual machine. To log on to another GUI, click the Session button after you've entered your login. Here, you can select the session you'd like to use. Why should this be done only after you've entered your username? If you do this the other way around, the system will by default use the settings you chose while logging in last time, and load the previously selected environment from the login history. If you chose the environment after entering your username, the system will load new settings. It may seem counterintuitive, but come to think of it, it actually makes sense. The system must remember a user's preferences in order to load them each time the user logs in, instead of using default settings. The GNOME desktop looks just like the one above. So far, it's empty. The strange thing is that none of the mouse buttons is responding. At first glance, one does not really know where to start. As we mentioned earlier, the assumption is that the user should focus on just one, specifically chosen application. A list of these applications is available when you click on the Activities button. This is equivalent to the Windows Favorites menu. You can find here a list of all open windows, that is, all running applications, as well as the list of other programs installed on the system. It always takes a bit longer for the second list to load because it requires the system to display all the applications that have been installed. Inevitably, it must take longer than displaying just a few most popular items. You can search for any one application or choose a whole category of applications. For example, let's choose Internet. When you click on an application, it opens. Again, please note that there is no feature here that would resemble the Windows system tray. Right now, you can see Firefox here. To switch between applications, you have to either change it manually or choose an application from the Activities Overview menu. In the default version of GNOME, you can run more than one application on the desktop. You can even organize the elements around it so it's not that bad. However, this feature actually stands in opposition to the general idea behind this environment. Just notice that if you run one application, the other disappears from the tray. You don't really know if it's running or not. This clearly shows that the designer wanted users to work on one application at a time. This solution obviously has both advantages and drawbacks. It can definitely increase productivity. When you work on just one application, you're not distracted by a huge number of windows or messages from various programs. The disadvantage can be that, for example, while using instant messaging clients, it's hard to keep track of your conversations. The only way in which application is to be able to notify us about the new conversation is an information bar at the bottom of the screen. where the message pops up for a moment. If you miss it, there are no windows with a classic flashing envelope or some other notification. Perhaps it's only a matter of getting used to it, but it definitely requires more effort than traditional interface. If you want to be true to the idea GNOME was designed with, you should open each application in a new desktop and switch between desktops. If one desktop is occupied, another shows up. In GNOME, you won't find any customary buttons such as maximize and minimize the window. But you can do this by double-clicking. If you want to have these buttons, you have to dig around the GNOME settings and enable the corresponding option. Of course, you can always minimize windows by dragging them to the edges of the desktop, but there's no separate buttons for minimization and maximization. In Ubuntu, you have such buttons located in the left side of the desktop, which makes things even more confusing. The rest of the buttons are quite typical. The button in the upper right corner of this desktop is responsible for the user menu. Other icons on the toolbar are standard. They include battery, network, volume. In the middle of the toolbar, you have the calendar, where you can define certain actions, tasks, or schedules. In general, the idea behind GNOME is similar to what Google is trying to do with its devices and services. For example, on any Android-based device, you can have access to the set of tools allowing you to manage your time, contacts, availability, social networking sites, and so on. GNOME seems to be heading in the same direction. The way it's designed encourages users to store their data in the cloud, that is, on the internet, where they'll be able to access it from any place at any time. The idea itself is interesting, but it begs the questions whether it's functional as a typical desktop. Perhaps as tablet computers are becoming more and more popular, such a solution might be very functional. Many people praise this approach, arguing that the way GNOME and its applications work definitely increases their productivity because it prevents them from being distracted by any external mechanisms. Nevertheless, GNOME offers a markedly different experience than other operating systems or graphical interfaces, and there's plenty of things new users will have to get used to. Probably, the attitude of many people towards this desktop will change a little after getting used to the new interface in the Windows systems. Windows Metro is based on roughly the same idea. The implementation may be slightly different, but the idea of running only a single application and the idea of a common desktop for all devices will definitely prove to be influential. In Windows, a traditional desktop will be just another application, exactly as it is in GNOME. So perhaps the idea is for the system to become Microsoft's competitor and an alternative for its operating systems. When it comes to functionality, GNOME offers the same functions in the same set of applications as KDE. In fact, the differences are noticeable mostly in the way the windows behave. Therefore, any further exercises will be done in KDE. You can do the exact same things in GNOME Desktop. Applications designed for KDE work in the GNOME and vice versa. In this case, there is no such thing as a dedicated application. Sometimes an application working under GNOME may need some KDE libraries that will be automatically installed to enable the application to communicate with the system. Your choice of the environment, whether it will be GNOME, KDE, LXDE, XFCE, or other, in no way limits your ability to use additional applications. However, plasmoids, for example, won't run in GNOME. So if you're looking for a desktop with a variety of components, it's better to choose KDE. If you're interested in the so-called integrated desktop, that is, a solution compatible with your mobile devices, GNOME is what you should go for. All in all, it's only a matter of choice, and each choice is a right choice. The bottom line is that you should feel comfortable with the interface, and that using it should be enjoyable and stress-free.